Howdy folks, today's video is inspired by the anime Dr. Stone as it asks the question, can our buildings and infrastructure last for thousands of years in the event that humans were to disappear in the blink of an eye? Now does anyone actually ask that question?
Think there's still any buildings we can use as landmarks?
Oh yeah, I guess that does come up. But anyways, if the premise is that humanity were to be magically petrified for 3,700 years only to wake up in a luscious green forest, then Dr. Stone would seem to answer this question with an emphatic no, not even a whiff. And while that answer seems plausible enough, I was still so curious to know not just if the anime is physically accurate, which if any anime could be held to account, it'd probably be the science education one, but I want to ask more broadly if our architecture and infrastructure could last that long at all. I mean, it sounds like such a simple inquiry, but oh boy, there are like so many interesting topics to explore to triangulate some answers, like how old do we design our buildings to be, and how do materials decay, and what about all the ancient works that currently exist? Could the unpetrified people go about unearthing modern architecture in their stone world? And I'm sure happy enough to focus on these questions instead of trying to fact check how possible each of the inventions that they come up with in the show, because I may cosplay as a YouTube smart guy, but honestly, I'm only kind of knowledgeable about a very specific branch of engineering. Now, have I hedged my statements enough? Now, to be frank, a large part of the reason I'm interested in this question is self-serving. I've spent many years now designing structures, and while I know pretty specifically how strong they are against applied loads, I realize I don't focus too much on how long they might be around for. I've even heard from coworkers who have since retired that they've seen buildings they designed serve their purpose, fall into disuse, and then eventual demolition all within the span of a 40-year career. So there's a bit of added personal interest here. So settle on in, we've got ourselves a long one today, y'all, and I can only come up with so much B-roll, so you're stuck with me in this office, which matches both my personality and skin tone. Okay, there are so many places to start this conversation. Evaluating the longevity of our built environment feels a bit like an exercise in naming every building. I'll start my 24,000 hour stream right after this goes live.
Oh my God.
Jokes aside, please don't hold me to that, this video isn't the only infotainment trying to address the question. Who else but the History Channel has taken a guess at life after people, and even under similar circumstances as Dr. Stone, assuming everyone were to simply vanish? So if this video whets your appetite and you have a spare up 20 plus hours, it explores the question quite well, and they have a few experts that really seem to know their stuff. Many of the examples they used seem to show structural collapse within about 300 years or so. But again, this video aims to condense that 20-hour experience and focus just on our buildings and infrastructure. Sorry that my 3D animations won't be as good. Alright, then back to the first point. I'm a simple man, and I refuse to reinvent the wheel, in part because I'm not exactly sure how much more I would do after that. So the best place to start would be to see what are some of the oldest works of architecture in existence currently. According to Wikipedia, that honor goes to the Tel Karamayel, a Neolithic settlement in Syria uncovered in the 1970s that dates back about 12,000 years. Similarly, the more popularly known Göbekli Tepe in southern Turkey dates back over 10,000 years as well, so they're doing numbers. And there are dozens of works that are more than 3,700 years old that we've discovered, but that's the thing. Many works needed to be uncovered. The oldest architectural fossils are often tombs or raised settlements, or were swept over by the landscape at some point, meaning they needed to be excavated. Some were generally unknown or had moderate cultural significance until being unearthed in the last 100 years or so. And now, not to diminish the significance of these archaeological finds, but in 4 millennia, I'd imagine we'd be able to find the remnants of foundations and basement levels of many works in various degrees of disrepair. Granted, that depends on the environment, geographic location, and type of construction. We'll get to those factors in a bit. We're still laying the groundwork. I mean, thanks to carbon dating, there should be bounds of evidence of even something so prone to decay as wooden structures. For example, near the site of the ancient megaliths of Stonehenge, decayed post holes were found nearby that date back about 10,000 years, so evidence of our civilization should be around. Now, maybe that shouldn't be so surprising, but I hesitate to speak too much more on the subject as I am very much so not an archaeologist. So what about the oldest works that would still be prominent in their landscape? Like, would an unpetrified architect wake up, see his design still standing, and of course, like, look at the camera and wink? Something like the 5,000-year-old Stonehenge, though not exactly a building, or the 4,500-year-old Egyptian pyramids both might qualify in this regard. Now, what do they have in common? Well, they're primarily made of massive stone blocks of limestone, granite, sandstone, a building material that is quite weather resistant, you might say. Either way, no reason to believe that these two stone structures wouldn't still be around in the Second Stone Age. But stone is a material that in modern construction is mostly used as an ornament or facade material, hardly structural or on the order of magnitude of the 36,000-pound blocks seen in the pyramids. So thinking of other building materials, what about fake stone, or as you may know it, concrete? Well, unlike steel or iron, we do have some ancient examples of this if we look to the Roman Empire, with one of my favorite subjects, the Roman Pantheon. This one's been around about 1900 years, in large part due to the unique pozzolanic concrete mix used. Now, it's sometimes said that this special material is self-healing in nature, contributing to its longevity, and this is partially true. The concrete mixture used contained a lot of cement that didn't initially react with water to become the strong binding agent that we know, and when cracks have formed over the years, this unreacted cement gets exposed to rain, allowing the cement to do its job and bind the concrete back together. That's the elevator pitch, at least. But still, the Pantheon has required significant repairs to patch up the cracks that the concrete couldn't do itself. The building was well maintained even during the Middle Ages when it served as a church, and more recently in 1925 had extensive repairs performed as well. And that's one critical factor in the lifespan of these buildings, is that, for better or worse, they've existed alongside people. For the worse, war, pollution, and climate change are obvious detriments and sources of damage, but people maintain buildings. We need them for shelter, function, enjoyment, whatever the case may be, we do put effort into their maintenance, usually. Fresh coat of paint, fixing up the roof, maybe it gets lost in the sauce, but these honey-do list items are integral to keeping our structures around. Then, for one more historical example, to bring us a bit closer to the action served up in Dr. Stone, the oldest building in Japan is the Horyuji Temple, dating back to the 7th century, making it 1,400 years old, not even the halfway point that we're looking for, but still impressive given that it's made of wood, and resides in a region that is prone to devastating environmental forces like earthquakes and tsunamis, and those are good distractions for me to follow down the next rabbit hole, as I'm already 5 buildings deep in my name every building task, and I should probably save some for the stream. But before getting into the negative effects of earthquakes and hurricanes, I want to sidestep to mention the positive effects of everyday learning thanks to today's video sponsor, Brilliant. Learning a little every day is one of the most important things you can do for both your personal and professional growth, and Brilliant keeps you on track to reaching your learning goals one day at a time. Brilliant helps you become a better thinker and problem solver with thousands of visual, interactive lessons in math, science, programming, data analysis, and more. It helps you build your critical thinking skills through problem solving, not memorizing. Brilliant's science courses help you develop your scientific intuition through visual, interactive problem solving that gets you hands-on with key concepts. You'll learn to think like an engineer with lessons on physical structures, electrical and digital circuits, gear systems, and more. To learn for free on Brilliant, go to brilliant.org/onstructures, scan the QR code on screen, or click the link in the description. Brilliant's also given our viewers 20% off an annual premium subscription, which gives you unlimited daily access to everything on Brilliant. Thanks again to Brilliant for sponsoring the video. Now back to the video. So, earthquakes, tsunamis, hurricanes, tornadoes, all the stuff of nightmares and Michael Bay films. However, modern design should be able to account for these in some way, and hypothetically with a much better understanding of them than our predecessors. So I went and read some building codes, wouldn't recommend, to see what kind of provisions we have regarding the expected life expectancy of structures and how we account for them beyond the maximum magnitude of loads. And didn't have to look far to see that our structures are designed with varying levels of failure probability depending on what kind of failure and what risk category they're assigned to. So let's talk about risk. Risk categories are assigned to buildings during their design phase based on the number of lives that would be put in peril if the structure were to fail, broadly characterized by this graph here. But practically speaking, we would place agricultural buildings like barns on the left with under 10 people at risk, residences and offices in the middle with maybe hundreds of people at risk, and places like hospitals or facilities that manage hazardous materials on the right, which acknowledges that many thousands could be affected by the failure of a single structure. Obviously, we see much higher levels of reliability for those risk category 4 buildings against sudden collapse versus a risk category 1 building against minor damage, like it's a factor of 1,000. But of course, this data is predominantly applicable to the load conditions of wind events, including hurricanes, or the load effects of people, which we don't have to worry about in our scenario. Now, these probabilities typically will line up with a 50-year service life, so not just standing for 50 years, but able to be used as intended, though when taking a cumulative probability, low risk category buildings have a 0.02% chance of sudden failure in that time span, whereas the higher risk category buildings will be standing in 99.99995% of cases, or 1 in 200,000 buildings would be at risk in that time frame. Even expanding out to 3,700 years, a risk category 4 building would only fail at a rate in 1 in 2,500. And it's numbers like this that sure help me go to sleep at night, even if the wind is howling. But the odds of having a broad design issue originating from even hurricane-force winds are dwarfed in scale by those related to earthquakes. Here, even the high-risk category buildings are allowed to be designed for a predicted failure rate of 1 in 40 for the maximum considered earthquake, although that drops to 1 in 200 for what are called design earthquakes, which definitionally is just supposed to be 2/3 of the maximum. So if I use that same failure probability method as we did for hurricane loads, assuming a design earthquake every 100 years for nearly 4,000 years, we would only see about 17% of the risk category 4 buildings fail, compared to 60% for the risk category 1, or about 400 times more likely to fail. Even still, earthquakes will mess our shit up, especially considering that one of the hottest spots for earthquake activity that I've seen in my lifetime is Japan, our subject location. I didn't forget about it, we're getting there. And on a side note, most of the design information I've been discussing is based on the American Society of Civil Engineers design loads. Japan has their own standards, which shouldn't be appreciably different, just worth noting. And all of this earthquake talk is not to mention any of the tsunami activity that could subsequently occur in the wake of earthquakes, which I'll touch on in just a bit. Sorry, I feel like I'm juggling like 50 thoughts right now. And originally I thought it might be a fun exercise to determine the raw probability of failure using what's called a Monte Carlo simulation, or a brute force probabilistic method of analysis that, based on assumed distributions of the relevant variables like strength, loading, etc., could ascertain the probability of structures remaining in the year 3700, like this were a last man standing event. But A, I'd have to relearn my structural reliability class from grad school, please don't make me do that, and B, the real reason is this has all been too ideal. The service life probabilities of failure assume that the building is as designed, but there will be many minor failures that occur within the building's systems that will weaken the steel or concrete that holds things up. So let me make it a bit simpler. We'll pretend it's for you, but really it's for my benefit. Think of structural strength and loading as shown graphically in time for some generic building. Originally, it has the assumed strength as designed, just about as high as it will go. Concrete technically will increase in strength a little bit as it ages. Then if at any point the loading exceeds the strength, it's game over for this building, and our strength line is going to be moving towards the other over time, where the demand spikes up at certain events like earthquakes or hurricanes. These events, as well as flooding or simple swaying in the wind, even if they don't overload the system, can potentially reduce the strength. Like even if the concrete material itself gets stronger, cracks will develop, steel reinforcing will rust and cause worse deterioration, loss of concrete, so forth and so on, until we all fall down. And all this brings to mind the concept of entropy, or the tendency for buildings, or really just anything, to devolve into chaos. And what is architecture but the antithesis of chaos in the environment? Taking round, bending trees, cutting them up into straight, rectangular boards, and framing out cubic spaces against an environment that wants to push, pull, heave, sink, and generally just move. And if there's one thing I know about buildings, we don't want them to move very much. So moving on to the third part of the video, we're going to talk about how buildings decay. And this could be a very long discussion, evaluating each standard construction material like concrete, steel, and wood. Even glass and plastic will play critical roles in the function of a building, but pitting these against the elements like sweltering heat, freezing rains, conditions, rotating through each of these 1,000 times, that's more or less why the History Channel took 20 hours to get through just a handful of examples, so I'll try to hit the most critical points. First, water is bad. Not for us. In fact, let's take this as a little reminder to have a swig. Little water reminder. How about that? But for our infrastructure, waterproofing is often a very important part. Water will accelerate rust in steel, rot in wood, and if the water freezes in a concrete material, will literally tear it apart from the inside. So if done properly, thin plastic sheets will be nested somewhere within this sandwich of wall materials and divert water away from the building. At least that's how we think of it in small timescales like the 50 years of service life. But 100,000 rainstorms later, the cheap cladding will be ripped away, the plastic wrap waterproofing material will wither in the sun and rip in the wind, and the thin wall framing elements would rust or rot, leaving behind the primary structural system. But water doesn't even have to deteriorate the building to devastate the architecture. Any structures supported on shallow foundations would be at risk of the effect of erosion or floodwater picking up soil particles and washing them away, and this comes from personal experience. Look, water is great. I've had like a gallon of the stuff today, but holy hell has it been the bane of my existence recently in forming a literal sinkhole beneath the foundation of my house. Not quite like those crazy photos that circulate the internet every now and then, but honestly just as scary, and I do plan on piecing together a video on that experience at some point. If anything, it'll be cathartic. But some materials are pretty good at resisting weathering due to moisture. Think plastics and glass. We sometimes wrap our buildings with that stuff. Tell me, that sip of water you took, what material was that cup made out of? But cups are small and buildings are big, so any cladding made out of these materials would need to be stitched together from hundreds or thousands of pieces with miles and miles of joints that would need to be perfect. Quickly even, water will make its way inside, even before the cladding is ripped up, and alongside water, a wild card in the slow deterioration of our built environment would be the growth of plant life. That good old life finds a way meme, which is a compounding effect, with the growth of roots taking whatever small cracks and crevices and stretching them into broad gaps and inviting more growth. So I guess it's kind of just like Pokemon, water and grass being good against rock and steel types, almost like it's supposed to make sense. But look, I'm really just trying to wax engineering with y'all, because once there are breaches in any cladding materials, all we have between a monument and buried ruins is the structural system. It's not like a glass building is going to stay standing around after the frame has rusted away. So let's think about the most common structural materials, concrete and steel. As mentioned, steel will rust as a result of water and oxygen reacting with the iron in the steel alloy, creating iron oxide, which is a material that has no structural strength and will flake away, exposing more steel and so on, until the material is reduced to dust. But the rate at which a material will rust varies greatly depending on the environment. Coastal environments are particularly harsh, with not only lots of water in the air, but also salts, which accelerate the chemical reaction. Some precautions can be taken in design and maintenance to decelerate the process, like painting or galvanization. Galvanization coats the material in zinc, which has a much lower rate of rusting. Additionally, environments that are dry, cold, and low oxygen would have the lowest rate of rusting, though it would be difficult to say if it would reach through the millennia. We'll see about that in a bit. So that's steel for you. As for concrete, it's a much more stable material in a wet environment than steel is. But there are other elements that can damage the material as well. Contributors like sulfates or high alkali content can cause the chemical structure of the binder within the concrete to lose its strength. And this is going to be specific to environments where those elements are present. But a significant contributor to the ultimate collapse of concrete structures will come down to those things that as a child we avoided stepping on for the safety of our mother's backs. Miscellaneous effects can cause cracks in the concrete, which invites water, even though we said like 2 hours ago that this effect in the Roman pantheon is self-healing. In modern concrete, it is not. The cement in our modern concrete is near fully reacted and wouldn't rebind with water infiltration, and in fact, because most modern concrete has steel reinforcing bars, those bars are themselves still prone to rusting. It would take a bit longer to occur with the concrete acting as a barrier, but when the rust develops and expands, it will cause additional cracks to develop, eventually spalling off whole pieces of the concrete and exposing the bare steel. These earthen materials, despite having the appearance of solid rock, are still susceptible to failure at the chemical level, and as such, it might be hard to imagine that any structures would still be around in 3,700 years. So now, finally, is probably a good time to take all of that background, apply it to our subject, and return to the question that started it all. Can our buildings last 3,700 years, and more specifically, would the region depicted in Dr. Stone really be a bucolic forest, or might we have some ruins to pick over, some long-forgotten statues? Yeah. The show did address this part in like the 3rd episode with the bronze statue of the Buddha that Yuzuriha had visited as a child, and like I'd expect from the science show, they added a solid description of the process, noting that when oxidizing, the oxidized metal doesn't expand and flake away like it does with steel and iron, but rather adheres to the base metal and preventing or at least greatly limiting the rate of oxidation of the rest of the material, and doing a great job of preserving the religious icon. Also, and this is just headcanon, Tsukasa empire is made of such rectilinear shapes it makes me want to believe that these are actually just concrete columns from collapsed buildings that were then raised by earthquake activity or the like to form the shape that we see in the show. I just couldn't unsee that, and now you can't either. But that's really the only relic found in the show, though I will say I haven't caught up with the 4th season or the manga, so could be wrong. Anyways, to apply all the parameters discussed using historical data points, modern design criteria for catastrophic events, material decay, weeks of my life, what constructions besides the Buddha might we see left in the world of Dr. Stone? As mentioned regarding historical sites, pieces of the built environment that used massive structural elements like bricks and stone differ greatly in size from modern construction elements. Works like Stonehenge and the Egyptian pyramids, which we've established will likely be around a little while longer, don't have thin, efficient walls made up of half a dozen different materials, and when compared to modern structural systems which are designed using optimized load factors and increased material strengths, give less construction tolerances and lower factors of safety when compared to older buildings. Steel columns can often just be 1/4 of an inch thick, and rust wouldn't exactly take it easy on it just because it's a little guy. Then we may want to look for structures with significant mass, like a bridge or dam, or over-designed building, like a hospital. But we can be specific. We know exactly, or at least generally, where the first few seasons of Dr. Stone took place, since they shared some maps with us along the way. Generally, the gang moves about the region southwest of Tokyo. Ishigami Village is shown to be on this peninsula here. Tsukasa's empire is shown to be over near Yokohama, I think, which is a pretty urban area. Maybe I was on to something with my pile of concrete theory. They had those mines over near Mount Fuji. Oh, and that bronze Buddha statue, I'm pretty sure this is the one right here at a shrine called Kotoku-in, which would be like right in the way between Tokyo and Ishigami Village. Wait, actually, Senku gives us the coordinates, and
35 degrees, 19 minutes north, by 139 degrees, 32 minutes east.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Now, I did some Google Maps sleuthing myself around the area, taking a peek at what kind of structures of interest we had here, and came up with this decent list. Some dams, some bridges, some hospitals, museums, and an actual castle. The problem with some of these examples, though, is they're in direct contact with ocean, water, the good stuff. Rusting rates in aggressive environments like near the ocean can remove over 1/10 of a millimeter of steel per year. Sounds minuscule, but over 3,700 years that could remove up to nearly 1/2 meter of steel, or almost 2 feet of thickness. There probably isn't a structural member in existence that has that much material, period, let alone could lose that much material and still stand against the forces of nature. So for that reason, as well as tsunamis, erosion, earthquakes, it's probably unlikely that we'd find just about any structure within a few kilometers of the coastline. Compare that to rusting rates in cold and dry places like we discussed before, which might only deteriorate at 1% of that rate, or half a centimeter of lost material in 3,700 years. However, even away from the coast, the region is considered to be subtropical and would have higher than average rates anyways. Alright, so as promising as something like a bridge or dam might be due to its massive size, the aggressive environments they occur in are likely to take the broader structure down. So what other effects can hurt our quest to find a standing structure in Dr. Stone? Well, later on in the show, sometime in Season 3, don't worry, this isn't a spoiler thing, but Senku realizes that the geography of the area has changed and recognizes that Mount Fuji, which oversees the whole island really, is a semi-active volcano. Although it has only erupted once in the last 400 years, it reportedly erupted a half dozen times between the year 1000 and 1500. So they correctly point out that it is quite likely that a dozen or more eruptions could have occurred in the area, drastically changing the environment and causing the demise of structures everywhere writ large. Weird, I couldn't find the volcano design parameter section in the American Design Guide. I wonder if the Japanese design standards give any input, but that being the case, it'd be easy to write off any structures I flagged that are basically anywhere near Mount Fuji or could be in a lava flow. The Mishima General Hospital has the high ground, meaning it could have less issue with flooding and soils eroding as a lower volume of rain would encounter the structure. It's also clad with what appears to be large stones or concrete panels on the facade, which have less joints and should last longer than a thin brick veneer. Now, I don't know the structural system, as even the interior shots of the facility cover up the structure. Hospitals aren't into the whole exposed structure thing. But the sheathing provided by painted walls could aid in the longevity, in addition to the fact that the structure would be designed with higher levels of reliability in there. Next, the Okno Dam, and I know I said no dams, but this one is pretty chill, likely seeing pretty low stresses in the concrete and may not even have reinforcing steel at all. Oh, and actually that would seem to be the case, as this is not a concrete dam, but is a rock-fill dam using earthen materials rather than a more engineered material. But it's so low profile that it may just end up covered in any eroded material. Next, there's the Sano Art Museum. It is inland enough, a concrete structure giving some longer purchase before the embedded steel would rust, but unfortunately has an exposed structure, which, even though I love that shit, is prone to increased weathering over time, especially for relatively small concrete members. Then, for some cool ones that I wish had better odds, this castle here appears to have a nice stone foundation, but it's close to the water and would have a hard time in that environment. But based on the topography, locating at a local high point, I feel like Senku and the gang could have stumbled across the stone foundation, assuming it actually is stone. Then there's this museum near the coast, which has a beautiful stone facade, which I think makes it a better candidate if it weren't in such of an aggressive environment. And even with all these caveats, we still have earthquakes. You didn't think I forgot about earthquakes, did you? So even with all the other factors flying in the face of longevity of these would-be monuments, we could still chalk up at best some % of these would be claimed by structural failures during earthquakes. And those figures don't even account for material deterioration. Oh boy, good luck out there. So while the likelihood of any individual building remaining intact will be incredibly low, in many cases literally a 0% chance of success. But there are too many structures out there, especially on the outskirts of the world's largest city, for me to believe that we'd have no surviving structures. Still, it's such a fun thought experiment. Like, could you imagine being the architect or engineer on one of these projects and how proud you would be to think that even some internet weirdo like me believes in your building? What a nice idea. So now that we've addressed our primary question, I need your help with something. I realized that recently I've been looking in the wrong direction. A large part of the reason I wanted to make YouTube videos and start this channel is not just to be the most obnoxious fact checker on the internet, which may be news to you, but what I mean is that I'm generally less interested in trying to figure out if a failure of the built environment as seen on TV could occur as shown. I'm told that I already sound enough like CinemaSins, I don't need to be stomping on his turf as well, because I think the far more interesting questions relate to concepts of future designs as seen in popular media. Looking for the engineering-based answers for why can or can't we build some of the jaw-dropping works that architects and artists dream up, like what are the limits of our current construction materials, techniques, and design approaches, and I want to apply that philosophy to this video as well, to flip the original question of this video on its head and ask what kind of designs, materials, etc. would be needed using today's technology that would result in our structures lasting 3,700 years into the future under mostly normal circumstances. And I don't mean that to be rhetorical. I'm interested in crowdsourcing your thoughts on this and following up in the next few months with a video something to the effect of how to design a building to last forever. Hopefully this video has put up some reasonable bowling-style bumpers to get the conversation headed in the right direction, and so I look forward to seeing what ideas y'all come up with in the comments below. As always, thanks so much for watching the video, like, subscribe, etc., and I'll see you in the next one. Adios.